From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. We are just one day away from the start of the Alabama Legislature's 2024 regular session. And judging by the crowded halls today, lawmakers are ready to go. A quick reminder that Governor Kay Ivey will deliver her annual State of the State address tomorrow from the Old House Chamber of the state capitol. You can watch the speech live right here on Alabama Public Television. Our coverage begins at 5:30 and the speech is scheduled for 6. Today in the State House, the first of 2 days of budget hearings preceding the session. Lawmakers from the General Fund Budget Committees met today to hear from agency leaders about what their budget needs will be for fiscal year 2025. Senate General Fund Budget Committee Chairman Greg Albritton expressed concern that even though the General Fund has grown, state expenses are growing at a pace that will be tough to keep up with.
I have typically, in my tenure here, I have had budget hearings throughout the years, okay, throughout the year, having more opportunity. I didn't do that this year. I think that was a mistake and an error. So my purpose this time is to try to help the committee and the public understand where our money is going and how much we have grown in our budget needs from only a few short years ago. So that's my purpose. I'm not trying to cast stones. I'm only trying to do it as a means of education as to how much more money it's taking to do the same old thing.
And do you think the state will be able to sustain kind of the budget?
No. I think our heyday is over, and that's another reason I'm asking that question, is to draw attention to the point that we may be seeing a reduction in growth soon. We just don't know what the future will hold.
Let's take a look at some of those budget increase requests from state agencies. ALEA is asking for an additional $47.6 million to cover increased costs. The Department of Corrections says it needs an additional $158 million. The Department of Human Resources, $72.9 million. Medicaid, $92 million. And Mental Health, $39.6 million. Again, each of these agencies detailed how increased costs across the board were forcing difficult financial decisions. One agency director, Cam Ward at the Bureau of Pardons and Paroles, says he is looking for cost efficiencies by partnering with other state agencies on efforts like job training and mental health, both of which reduce recidivism.
Set out a certain amount of goals, and by the way, not for more money from the legislature, but what can we do with existing resources to make sure we partner with all these agencies up here. We've also had over 15 private sector companies that said, hey, we want to hire people who are formerly incarcerated. We have a labor shortage, we all know that. You've heard from the Secretary of Labor, you've heard from the Lieutenant Governor talk about it. We need more people in the labor force. So we partnered with various companies around the state, and you know what we found? It works. It goes back to my three-legged stool, and I said this about our reentry 2030, and that is, one, we want to go from 30% recidivism, which makes us ranked 25th in the country, to less than 15%, which would make us in the top 5 best in the country by the end of the decade. And we can get there through job training, through substance abuse treatment, through mental health treatment. We get there because we have all these partners. It's not new money. It's money we're already using anyway. Why don't we direct that toward the resources which are going to make sure someone doesn't commit a crime again? And you can see some of the stuff we've done. Alabama Power Grid, they have built a tree line trimming program out at Perry County where we now have graduates going through that program, and when they leave it, guess what? They're clean and they get a job. That's what we want.
The push to expand broadband internet to rural and underserved parts of Alabama got a big financial shot in the arm today. Governor Ivey was in her hometown of Camden to announce more than $180 million for so-called middle-mile broadband projects. The goal is to help fill the gaps in broadband expansion for areas of the state where expansion costs have proven to be economically prohibitive. Today's announcement will provide funding to 12 internet service providers to install more than 4,000 miles of broadband projects.
It bridges the gap between urban and rural empowering communities like Camden to compete in the digital age. Here in rural Alabama and many areas across the state, the lack of adequate broadband infrastructure hindered progress and limited potential.
I saw firsthand the difficulty that my constituents experience due to the lack of broadband, and as their representative, I have remained committed to closing the digital divide. But I know that none of us can do this alone. This is truly an effort, a state, federal, and local effort, and we should be proud that government is working for the people.
We'll be right back with tonight's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
Joining me next is John Treadwell, Clerk of the Alabama House of Representatives. Mr. Clerk, thanks for coming on Capital Journal.
Thanks for having me with you today, Todd. Appreciate that.
Well, session's here. Starts tomorrow.
It starts tomorrow.
Are y'all ready? Ready or not?
We are ready to go. Ready to go.
Well, one reason I wanted to have you on is, it's I know there are some updates to the bill drafting system. We cover the legislature. We see sort of what's happening on the floor and everything, but there's a lot that happens behind the scenes, not just with staff, but with lawmakers. And I understand there's some updates to how y'all do things kind of behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. In last session, we implemented the new Link system, the new integrated computer system for the first time. And after moving away from a system that we had used for over 25 years, it was an interesting process getting to that point where we could actually go live. And we think we had a successful session. There were things that we learned, some tweaks and changes that we identified that we needed to make moving forward. And so we've been working with the IT folks in the interim, working through some of those changes and enhancements to make some improvements for this session. And I think legislators and staff and the public as well will see some of those enhancements in this session.
It's all about it going smoothly, right? You don't want
Correct.
hiccups.
That's right. And a lot of moving parts from the bill drafting at the very beginning, which starts in LSA, and they begin using the system there when it moves to committee introduction, then committee, chamber floor, moves to the next chamber, back, all of the moving parts, and that's integral to the legislative system, and all of that now being integrated, and then at the end of the day pushed out for public consumption as well, so that the public is aware of what's going on in this building.
I was going to ask you about that because, if you're a lawmaker, if you're staff, if you're a lobbyist, you use these systems every day, all day, and so you can become familiar with them. But what if you're, just a interested citizen wanting to get involved in the process, follow legislation, and keep up with the legislature? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I think we've made some enhancements to our legislative website, and it's allison.legislature.state.al.us, and that takes you to the general landing place for the Alabama legislature. And there are several tabs there in that landing spot, and one of those is the bill tab, and that leads you to the ability to be able to search and see bills that have been introduced by members for this session. It also allows you to go back and look at bills from prior sessions. But there have been some enhancements to that process as well. We've also enhanced our bill tracking feature where you can go in with a Google account and create tracking lists. Let's say you're interested in bills relating to healthcare. You can go through, you can search, you can use a key term search bills related to healthcare, find those numbers, and actually create a tracking list with those bill numbers on it. And then every time any movement is made by that bill, if it's put on a committee agenda, if it's reported out of committee, once it makes it to the floor and it's acted on the floor, all of that information would be sent to the user under that tracking system. And I think the lobbyists are aware of that, and lobbyists use that a lot. But I think the public more and more is becoming more aware of that feature and something that they can do to track and be aware of legislation as it's moving through the process.
Sure, because when these things get going, when sessions get going, there'll be advocacy efforts to say, hey, follow House Bill X or whatever, and so they might know the bill number, but can go and look for themselves to read the information for themselves and follow. So I think that's a really good feature. I encourage folks to use it.
And then we also have the meetings tab on the general landing page of the legislative website, and it's a place where you can see what bills are being heard in committee. You can actually see an agenda that's going to be up on in a particular committee on a particular day. You can click on those bills, read those bills individually from that point. You can also, if it's the day of the committee meeting, there's a link there so that you can actually click onto the committee meeting and live stream that committee meeting if it's in one of our rooms where we have live stream capabilities. In the House, we still have a couple of committee rooms that we don't have live streaming capability, but most all of our major committees and other committees, you can watch those and see it live, what's happening in committee.
Mm-hmm. Which is a huge upgrade from even just a few years ago, 5 or 6 years ago when that stuff didn't exist. Well, it won't be too long until all of this is improved.
Right.
Committee rooms, chambers, everything in the new State House. That if right beside us here in our building, they've dug a hole to sort of prep for the construction. So tell me about the latest you're hearing from the project managers and all this about the new State House, timeline, things like that.
Yeah, we're continuing to move into the design phase, and the architects and the design folks are really digging in and looking at the best design possible for the new State House, looking at public access, looking at security and safety, looking at technological advances and features that we can capitalize on to make everything work more smoothly for staff and members and the public as well. One of the things that we're really excited about is being able to offer some space for our school children. We have thousands of school children that come through the State House every year, and we're going to have some space for them and the ability to maneuver them safely through the State House so that they can have an educational experience and see what goes on behind the walls of the State House. So a lot of opportunities to capitalize on some great things, and we're moving forward. Things are continuing to move well, and we're really excited about this project.
That's great, especially about the school kids, because you're right. It's the fourth graders, I guess, that are studying Alabama history, so they all come. And, this building, let's face it, the halls are small, the ceilings are low sometimes, so you kind of feel bad for them sometimes. Yeah. So hopefully that'll be that sounds like a really major upgrade. Is there a timeline estimate? I remember talking with your colleague, Secretary Harris, about maybe it's 2026 or then that's an election year, maybe after that? Is it kind of still up in the air?
I think we're still looking at moving in 27, the organizational session in January of 27. That would be a clean start for the quadrennium. That would give us time. There's going to be an amount of time that we're going to need to move things in and make sure that the building is operational, make sure that our voting systems are working correctly, that everything is integrated properly. And so we're going to need that time to make sure everything's ready to go. So it seems like the best case scenario would be for us to be up and running and ready to go that organizational session in 27.
In the new term, brand new legislature, brand new building.
Right.
And we look forward to our new space in there, and we appreciate being included.
We're excited to have you in there.
Absolutely. We're out of time, but Mr. Clerk, we will see you on the floor, and good luck.
Thank you. We need it. Appreciate it.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
Welcome back to Capitol Journal. With the legislative session starting tomorrow, my colleagues Randy Scott and Jeff Sanders join me for a little discussion about what to expect come Tuesday. Gentlemen, thanks for doing this. Thanks for taking the time. I know it's been a busy day.
Just when you thought it was safe.
Well, so session starts tomorrow on Tuesday. We've got a live coverage starting at 5:30, State of the State, big day, but then they really get into the nitty-gritty. How's the vibe out there? How's the vibe of going into this second session of this term? Randy, I'll start with you.
Well, seeing some of the lawmakers thus far, everybody seems to be positive on the uplift. I know the halls are starting to slowly fill up with people the closer we get to that gavel dropping tomorrow. Everyone seems to be eager and ready to get to work. I know they've been talking about some ideas that they want to see floated and discussed bills, proposals in other words. So everybody is ready to go, for lack of better words.
Well, Jeff, you're the newest to the team, but you've been covering politics for decades. What have your impressions been in the hallways this week?
To me, it seems, and the folks I talk to, there's, I hate to say the word excitement, but there is some a lot of optimism. I think from the Republican side, they feel they really want to hit the ground running really hard and pretty fast as the session begins. And there's a lot of stuff they really want to get pushed through this year.
Well, let's talk about that. So you're going to be covering a lot in the Senate.
Yes.
So let's start there. What issues do you expect out the gate that we're going to hear a lot about?
Well, I think this absentee ballot bill that Senator Garland Gudger is proposing, they're going to talk about that. And it brought it up last year, did not make it last year, I think through the Senate. That would make it a Class A misdemeanor for a person to assist someone else with an absentee ballot. Democratic pushback on that is, they're saying that what if, elderly people could be sentenced to prison, could have a felony because they needed someone to take them to the ballot box. Republicans push back and go, well, we're trying to make the voting process easier. And then Democrats would turn around and say, well, there's not really, how much fraud do we really have in Alabama? Is this something we really need to be working on? But I know that's something they're going to hit the ground and tackle this week.
Lots of debate is going to be on that, and because we remember that debate in the House last year got really, it was probably the longest that went on. Well, what about this year? What are you hearing in the House in terms of what we might see here in the first couple of weeks?
Well, I know education is something they are really looking forward to covering and talking about, because they feel as though this is something that is definitely going to help the state move forward from a workforce standpoint and basically from a schooling standpoint, to make sure kids have all they need and schools have all they need and districts get all they need, because this is what moves the state. This is what gets people interested in coming to Alabama if you have a good workforce. And a workforce comes from those who are educated within the state, ready to contribute to that workforce and move the state forward. And so education was one of the big topics they were talking about. And I also piggyback on what Jeff said, dealing with make sure there were secure elections. They also want to make sure that there are fair elections. This is something like, as you just mentioned, something that they were talking about a lot last year. Okay, we're going to talk about making sure elections are secure, but we're going to talk about, too, making sure they are fair, most importantly.
Yeah, I was talking with Representative Hassel about that, and there's going to be significant pushback. But I also think it's why Republicans are starting in the Senate this year so early, because last year they waited so late.
Yeah.
It was kind of impossible. Well, Randy, sticking with you for a second, what are you hearing about gambling? They're saying it's back this year. We're expecting legislation, but they're saying it's going to start in the House. So what are the rumors you're hearing?
The rumors are, we hear it's going to start in the House. We guess it's going to start in the House. Is it going to start in the House? So a lot of people are for the talk about the gaming issue. But the gaming issue is what they're worried about. What are we going to see? What are we going to have to work with?
The specifics really matter.
Yeah, the rubber that hits the road when it comes to gaming. You talk about doing it, you talk about presenting it. Well, what are you going to present to us? When are you going to present it to us? And how are we going to talk about this? Because this has been an ongoing discussion for going on almost 20 years now.
Yeah, it's like herding cats.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or trying to, well, like you said, herd cats. But this is something that they're looking forward to. Who's going to handle it? Who's going to talk about it? I think people are still trying to get the talks in, because once the session starts, that train's going to go down the tracks, and it's going to be a little quick for some people.
Yeah. And I guess the reason it is going to start in the House is the last couple of times that it even had a chance. I think back to 2021, where they passed a bill in the Senate, but it went to the House and died. It kind of ran out of time, right? And so I think the Senate has this attitude that, look, y'all figure it out in the House. If and when you can get a bill upstairs, then we'll consider it, but we're not going to waste our time on it. Is that what you're kind of hearing from the Senate?
That's kind of what I'm hearing. And the other thing, too, is that every way they've looked at this and gone at this the last few years has not worked. It's passed the Senate, but it dies or doesn't even come up in the House. I'm curious to see how they're shaping that conversation this year. They have been working on this for several months now. They have been traveling the state, some of the Republican lawmakers, kind of gathering information and talking to folks and local officials. They have a plan, and from what I am hearing, it looks a little bit different than we've seen the last few years. The issue is how much traction can it get in the House, and I think a lot of people forget, this isn't just a Republican versus Democrat issue. It is when you get down into the weeds of it all, a lot of Democrats have had issues with the bills in the past because they would close down some of the bingo halls in West Alabama, and they're not going to let that happen in their district.
Well, from West Alabama to even over in Macon County, there have been halls that have been closed. And if you remember, maybe a short time ago, in between the change of the new year, there were ads being run on air that were talking about gaming issues, trying to get the people's attention to say, hey, talk to your lawmaker to make sure they're going to talk about this, because this is something that they have been saying we're going to address for a number of years now, but as you said, it gets to the House or it gets to the Senate and it's bogged down in recent years. So I haven't seen any lately, but I know it seemed right around New Year's they kind of started or faded out.
Yeah, I actually got a couple of text messages. Yeah, that's kind of the new thing, both on political campaigns and these advocacy campaigns. They text you. So I got text that I guess it was a pro-gambling group. So you're talking about, here's a link, go contact your lawmaker. So that was like last week. So it's coming.
It's coming.
And so just to clarify, we're talking about three kind of legs of the gambling stool: a lottery, which Alabama is one of only a handful of states without a lottery; casino gambling, expanded casino gambling, and more importantly, or importantly, regulation of that, and then sports betting, allowing that and regulating that. And what I keep hearing from members, some who have not seen the bill yet, have not seen any kind of draft bill, is what they're looking for. And you're right, it's Republicans and Democrats. This is a very nebulous kind of political issue. They're looking for, how much is it taxed? Are we really taxing this to the extent that the state should? Where does that money go? Is it education? Is it health care? Is it mental health care? Things like that. And is it truly going to be regulated? Is it truly going to be enforced? Or are these kind of fly-by-night operations going to? So those are the questions that lawmakers have of the bill sponsors, and I imagine those conversations are going on pretty hot and heavy right now.
Lawmakers are always interested where the money is going to go. Let's be honest.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. Well, the issue of school choice is also expected to come up a lot this session. I'll ask you both. What have you heard from the rank and file about the prospects of a school choice bill? Is it likely? Is it not? Or is it still too early to tell?
Well, I know Anthony Daniels, who is the minority leader of the House, said on last week, we really need to take another look at this, because there are many cases where you have some entities that are getting state funding that don't need it, that are claiming that they were charter school or school of choice. And he says that there's a really big need to really go through this with a fine-tooth comb and see, okay, do we really need this, or do we need to focus on public schools, which a lot of the other members of the Democratic caucus were saying last week when they had a meeting at historic Dexter King Memorial Baptist Church, talking about some of their platform. So it's an issue that people are for and against, but I think it's also an issue that people want more understanding of, especially coming from a legislative standpoint.
Yeah, and you're talking like accountability. Are there going to be standards? Can it just be any fly-by-night, school that gets public tax dollars? Jeff, what about you? What have you heard on the between here and around the state about likelihood? Is there a groundswell for school choice or not?
I really just to me, this is an issue that really does fall on the political spectrum, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. I think we're seeing a push from the governor. She wants school choice. It seems to be more of momentum for it this year. Again, the devil is in the details sometimes about what schools benefit. Are certain private schools going to make money off of this? That's the pushback you're seeing. I never make predictions in politics, but it seems to have a little more momentum this year than it's had in years past.
I would agree with that, and I think a big reason for that is Republicans, on the Republicans conservative side, there's a lot of sort of national juice behind this and a real drive for school choice. You've seen that in other states and everything. And so I do think there's a desire from conservatives, including the governor, hey, let's do something. But man, you're right, the details matter so much on this. And so a couple of things to look for are, will there be a cap on exactly how much money is allowed to go to school choice vouchers? Are there standards attached to it, like you were saying with alternative schools? Things like that. Will those students that choose other schools be tested the same as public school students? So I think, and those all kind of came from Dr. Mackey in our conversation.
Proper spending of tax money. That's or is there accountability there? I think that's what you are hearing that from both Democrats and Republicans.
I agree. Well, lots of interesting issues to watch, and we've got State of the State coverage tomorrow. We got a week full of session. It's going to be a busy one. And gentlemen, I'm looking forward to being here with you to report the news.
I'm excited.
Herding the cats.
All right. We'll be right back.
When the Soviet Union successfully launched Sputnik in October 1957, the United States needed to quickly join the space race. Werner von Braun, head of the U.S. space program at Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, suggested using a modified Redstone rocket to President Eisenhower. The resulting rocket, Juno, launched Explorer 1, America's first satellite into orbit, on January 31, 1958. The satellite remained in space until 1970.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll join us tomorrow night for our live coverage of the State of the State. That's 5:30 here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capital Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.